Welcome to the Student Housing Calculator webinar, brought to you by the student housing professionals at COCM, Capstone On-Campus Management. The purpose of this webinar is to introduce you to this innovative campus housing planning tool, as well as walk you through a case study to enable you to then use it at your campus. I'm Alton Irwin, Chief Marketing Officer for COCM, and I'm joined by Brian Collins, our Research Analyst and IT Director. We'll be joined by Doug Brown, President of COCM and creator of the Student Housing Calculator, for the Q&A portion at the end of this webinar. Our objectives for the webinar today are as follows. Tell you the story of how the Student Housing Calculator was created and why. Teach you how to use the Student Housing Calculator using a fictitious campus we are calling ABC University. And then finally, a Q&A section at the end of the webinar to answer your questions.
As Alton mentioned, the Student Housing Calculator is the creation of Doug Brown, COCM's president. Prior to joining COCM, Doug spent over 20 years as a university administrator at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, the University of Delaware, and the University of New Orleans. His responsibilities at these institutions included the areas of food service, parking, and student housing. Doug created the Student Housing Calculator by drawing from the combination of his higher education and COCM experiences. Let's listen now to hear Doug tell the story behind its creation.
You know, in 2001, when I left higher education and began COCM, we at that time was a development company, and we put together a lot of proposals for RFPs that were coming our way, and universities were asking for, you know, projects of various sizes, and without really understanding a lot about how they arrived at how they were going to size a project. So it was kind of by accident that those two perspectives came together with a young professional we had in our office that knew how to use an Excel spreadsheet real well. And we began to say, how could we develop something that uses logical data that the university generates themselves and use it as a way to predict housing needs going forward in the future. When I stepped out of higher education and began to look back and we began to use the calculator, I found that universities are incredibly predictable. And if you look at their data over a period of time, like a 5-year window, you can pretty much predict what is going to happen in the next year because there aren't factors that dramatically change the demand for housing. And so the tool began to help sort of not only educate us on giving good advice to universities, but it began to help universities begin to understand themselves because it didn't look at just the silo of housing or the silo of enrollment management or the silo of financial aid. It began to look at the whole thing as one thing. Well, one of the things the tool helps us do is it begins to bring some of the silos down and brings people together using a common data source. Because one of the things that we have learned that if we can pick up the yield of first-time to college students to live on campus, we know that they are about 6 to 10% more likely to become a second-year student at that institution as opposed to if they lived at home or off campus. So if I'm in the enrollment management profession and I can see that a service on our campus can actually enhance my ability to maintain my enrollment over time and in turn stabilize a housing program over time, then our interests are served. If we're separated in that process, in that decision-making process, or if we're separated in the planning process for how to retain students over time, then our interests are not served. We found out it was a powerful tool because when we started talking about it and showing institutions their numbers, enrollment management people sitting down together with housing people and others, we began to see light bulbs go off in their head. Those aha moments that I never really realized that this was connected to that. And I didn't really realize that, you know, what I want, the decisions I make about either expanding housing or maybe renovating housing in the future or maybe lowering the density in older product or whatever the issue might be would have an impact on the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is, for most institutions, is maintaining a good, solid enrollment, perhaps even growing, and then perhaps even obviously having better outcomes relative to graduation rates. So housing can help do that, but only if all those folks are sitting in the room together. So the tool was the common ground and the data point that people could begin to look at and begin to strategize together. And it's those aha moments that said, you know, we're kind of onto something.
Before we begin inputting data on the website, let's introduce the situation with ABC University. This is a private liberal arts university with a current full-time enrollment of 5,217 students. The campus housing program has 3,623 beds in its design capacity, which we'll touch on a little bit later. The current housing stock is a mixture of all room types. Has traditional, which is a shared bedroom and it has community bathrooms. Suite style, which is shared bedrooms with a bath in the unit. And apartment style, which is a private bedroom and a full kitchen. Enrollment data is the backbone of the student housing calculator. What you're looking at here is the historical growth over the last 6 years for ABC University. The blue line represents first-time full-time enrollment, which is normally called the freshman enrollment. And the orange line represents the total full-time enrollment for the university. What you'll notice is that over the past 5 years, it has trended downwards until its sharp uptick in the last year. Most of the traditional halls were built in the 1960s. The suites and apartment facilities were built in the 70s and 80s. One of the apartment facilities that you're looking at here, Settlers Park, is in very poor condition, and ABC would like to demolish this and replace it with a larger, more modern facility. With this information, let's begin filling out the student housing calculator. The student housing calculator is located simply enough at studenthousingcalculator.com. Once you go to that URL, this is the landing page that you're going to see. You'll notice in the top right-hand corner, you'll be prompted to log in or sign up. If this is your first time here, you're obviously going to click the sign up button. And that will take you to a registration page. We'll be prompted for your name, email address, and your password. We only need your name and email address to get started. And like we say on the left-hand side, we promise that no one will try to contact you and try to sell you anything. After you do that, you're going to hit Get Started. After you hit Get Started, you'll get a verification email, which you'll click on that link, which will take you to the resources that you'll need page. You'll see here we just simply have a detailed list of the data needed to fill out the student housing calculator. Let's listen now to Shelby Riddle, Merchant Card Services Coordinator for COCM, describe these resources for you and where to get them.
Two sets of information. Both are typically easy to obtain, but it helps to gather everything you need before you start walking through the process. The first piece of information is enrollment data. We found the common data set is the easiest and most clearly defined source for this information. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Common Data Set, it is a document produced annually by either the Institutional Research Department or Enrollment Management Division on your campus. If you do a Google search with your campus's name and the words Common Data Set, you'll probably find it fairly quickly. If your campus doesn't produce a Common Data Set, you can also get the information from the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, more commonly known as IPEDS, which is a clearinghouse of information provided by the National Center for Educational Statistics. If you can't find either of these, contact your campus's Institutional Research Department or Admissions Enrollment Management Division directly. The second set of information you'll need is housing information consisting of the name and number of beds for each residential building. It is very important the information is accurate and complete in order for the calculator to truly provide a good picture.
For the sake of time, all of the data you would normally have to pull together from various sources is provided in the fictitious case study. After clicking Continue on the Resources You'll Need page, we are taken to the Intro page. Here we're going to enter ABC as the campus name. Then 2017 for the current academic year. Notice that this then automatically shows 2018 in the next cell. Then we simply click Save and Continue. We are now taken to the Step 1 page. Here we see the first input. On your campus, what is the current percentage of first-time, full-time, degree-seeking students that live in on-campus housing? We enter 75 for 75% in the box. We then click Save and Continue to proceed to the next page. Now we see the Step 2 page. The first input asked for is, for the corresponding academic years, what was the degree-seeking first-time, full-time enrollment? Here we're going to enter the following numbers. For 2012-13, 1,479. For 13-14, 1,422. For 2014 through 15, 1,388. For 15-16, 1,376. Then 1,299. And then lastly, for 17-18, 1,557. We then simply click Save and Continue. Now we see the Step 3 page. The information asked for is as follows. On your campus, what is the current percentage of total full-time degree-seeking undergraduates that live in on-campus housing? We enter 68 for 68% in the box. Then we simply click Save and Continue. We now see the Step 4 page. On this page, we're asked for two series of data inputs, the total full-time enrollment and the total part-time enrollment. The total part-time enrollment is requested because we have an equation running in the background that uses this number. That equation helps us weed out the part-time students from the reported yields to live on campus to get a more accurate picture of how many full-time students actually live on campus. So for the first question, for the corresponding academic years, what was the total degree-seeking undergraduate enrollment? We're going to enter the following numbers from the case study. For 2012-13, 5,149, then 5,195. For 14-15, 5,081, then 5,040. For 16-17, 4,884, and then finally 5,217. For the second question, for the corresponding academic years, what was the total part-time enrollment? We're going to enter the following numbers. For 2012-13, 100, then 125, then 85, 75, 56, and then finally for 17-18, 68. After we enter the final number, we simply go to Save and Continue and click. Now, Step 5 is the page where we're going to enter the current housing capacity of the campus. And this is the page that probably takes the most time. And it asks for both the set and design capacities. To explain the differences between what we mean for set and design capacity, let's listen to Jeremy Steed, Operations Director here at COCM.
The difference between design and set capacity. Design capacity is the total number of residents the hall was originally designed to house, which would mean according to the original plan. The set capacity is the number of residents the hall is currently set to house. For example, a room originally designed to house 2 students but currently housing 1, or a room originally designed to house 2 students but currently housing 3 or even 4.
We now see the following. For each residential facility that is considered college-owned, operated, or affiliated housing stock, list its name, the capacity it was designed for, and its current set capacity. So for each campus hall entry, we're going to input the following. For the first hall that we have in the ABC University case study, we have Atherton Hall, which is a suites product, and it has a capacity of 345 beds in set capacity, and then 350 in design. And then after each entry, you'll notice that we have a button that says Add a Hall, so we're going to click on that to make the next entry. Then we're going to enter Brown Commons, and that's the suites product that ABC has. It has a set capacity of 480 and a design of 500 beds. Charles Apartments. 145 beds in set capacity, 150 in design. Settlers Point Apartments, which we talked about a little while ago, that's in poor condition. It has 600 beds in set capacity, as well as 600 in design. Next is Campbell Suites. 395 beds in set capacity and 400 in design. And I want to make notice here, or make a note, that down below, as you enter the numbers, you'll notice that you have a running tab of total set capacity and total design capacity. This has been added so that when you get through, you can check your numbers to make sure that you have accurate entries for all of the two different capacities. Next is Quad Halls, which has a capacity of 1,015 in set, and then 1,020 in design. Then we're going to add a hall, main halls, which are a traditional product, and that's 295 beds in set and 300 in design. And then lastly, we have heritage halls to be added, which is a suites product, with 303 beds in set and 303 beds in design capacities. So scrolling down to the bottom, we see that now we have a total set capacity of 3,578, as well as a total design capacity of 3,623 beds. And as we see in the case study, those numbers are the same as what we have in that study, so we know that we've made all of our entries correctly. So having entered all the set design capacities for the campus residence halls, we can now click See Results. What we now see is the 10-year projection based upon our data inputs. Note that this projection automatically defaults to inputs for the set capacity. To see the projection for the design capacity, we simply go to the left corner and click on the button labeled View Design Capacity. And you'll notice the significant differences between the 10-year projected bed counts for these two types of capacity because of the differences in the numbers. Now, also on this page, in addition to the 10-year projected bed count, there are various graphs or graphics for the various inputs. For example, you see in the first section after the 10-year projected bed count, the current yields to live on campus for your first-time undergraduates, all other undergraduates, as well as total undergraduates. We then have a section for current housing capacity. You'll notice that the infographic on the left indicates the difference between the design and set, because ABC campus is designed to have 3,623 beds across 8 buildings, but it's currently set for 3,578 students. Thus, there is a difference of 45 beds in the two capacities. Then finally, at the bottom of the page, you see enrollment growth rate historical trends. As Brian went over earlier in the webinar, the historical enrollment data for ABC University is such that for the majority of the years that we're considering, they had a decline in enrollment. Then the last 2 years, they actually had an uptick in enrollment. The calculator takes all of that data and provides an average growth rate, which we see here is less than 0.5%. To introduce you to the next section of the webinar, performing the various what-if scenarios with the calculator, let's listen now to Valen Merrick, CLCM's General Manager for the Krista McAuliffe Residential Community on the campus of Bowie State University.
Then comes the part where you're able to experiment a little bit. While looking at the original output, you're given the ability to run through some real-life what-if scenarios that you may be facing. Want to see exactly how adding a new resident hall will affect your numbers? Give it a shot. Want to gradually phase out existing housing over 5 years? Come, plan it out. Thinking about increasing the number of freshmen you require to live on campus? This will show you exactly what that looks like. These are the types of scenarios this tool is equipped to help you visualize. One of the favorite features we've built into the housing calculator is the ability to save your progress as you go. You can come back, make changes, or continue on. When you've completed the process of data entry, you'll have access to a one-page report illustrating your outcome and the details that allows you to get there. So, if you're working with the housing program and you want confidence in planning for the future, we've built just the tool for you.
As Valen mentioned, this is the fun part. We get to look at the future and play with various what-if scenarios for the 10-year projection period. To explain some of this and to display it, we're going to look at 3 different scenarios. So this is the first one, and it's basic. Are there any years in the projection period in which ABC University will need additional beds? This is based off of the numbers we input just a few minutes ago, and you can see basically just looking at the 10-year projection chart that you're looking at set capacity right here, but you can always toggle that back and forth, and you can also see that to answer our question in the scenario, based on set capacity here, the shortages occur in 2020 and 21. And if you toggle to the design capacity, you can see that the shortages don't occur until 24 and 25, the academic year. So that's a major difference, and that sort of displays the importance of the difference between set and design capacity. So that's scenario 1. So scenario 2 is a little more involved. We're going to change the percent of first-time, full-time students living on campus from 75% to 85% in 2018 and every year after that. So the freshman yield to live on campus, we're going to change. We're just going to bump it by 10% and see what that does to our 10-year projections. So what you're going to do is you're going to scroll down to the section labeled Current Yields to Live on Campus, and you're going to click the Change Yields button. You can see we have 2 line items here for the 2 cohorts of students, and we're going to change the top one, from 75 to 85%. And you'll notice he did not have to re-enter 75 or 85 into all of them. When he makes a change, the calculator assumes that change for all the years going forward. So just click Update Campus Yields, and you're going to see what it does to our projection chart. The first thing that you're going to notice is that you have orange bars added to the chart. The blue bars are still there, and they look a little smaller there because the scale of the graph has changed. You're obviously pulled back a little bit more, so the bars are a little smaller. But what you're seeing is the blue is the original input. That's what we were looking at a few minutes ago. That's based on the first data that we put in. And now we have the addition of these orange bars. What the orange bars reflect are all of the edits that we've made. So we changed the yield to live on campus for that freshman class to 85%. And now you're going to see we have shortages beginning right off the bat in 2018 and 19 going forward. So something to note just about the graph and its functionality, you can show or hide projections based on what you want to see just by clicking at them in the legend. So if you want to hide the updated projections, just click on those. And if you want to hide the original projection, just click on those. But the importance of seeing this scenario too is that just by changing the yields to live on campus for the freshman class, that is just the percent of freshmen living on campus, you've increased the demand for housing without ever increasing enrollment for the university. So that is scenario 2. So let's go back and let's look at scenario 3, which is even more involved. We're going to change. The first scenario, we changed nothing. We just looked at our projection graph. The second scenario, we changed one factor, and then this one, we're going to just increase the level of difficulty by changing 2 variables, or really changing 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the enrollment growth for both first-time full-time students and total full-time students to 2% beginning in 2018 and every year after that. And then we're going to move on to the actual housing stock. We talked about Settlers Point a little while ago, and we're going to take that offline. We're going to demolish that in the academic year 19 and 20, and then we're going to bring and build a new apartment community in the academic year 21 and 22. So that's scenario 3. Let's look at how we're going to do that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to reset the data. And You reset data, you hit continue, and what that's going to do is not going to take all your inputs away. It's just going to take the changes that you've made away. So the orange bars are gone. It's going to take you back to what you originally had when we put in all the numbers at the very beginning. So we're going to scroll down to the enrollment growth rate historical trends section and hit the button change growth rates. And we're going to change every year for both classes of students to 2%. And you can see again, when you change one, it affects the future years just for your convenience. So, and then you click update growth rates. So you can automatically see your orange bars and what they're doing, but we're also going to take Settlers Point offline and bring the new apartment online. So what we're going to do that, we're going to scroll down to the blue section in the middle that is current housing capacity and change the capacity. This is where a lot of our data is, depending on how much housing you have, but you'll scroll down to the apartment complex that we want to take offline, which is this one, Settlers Point. So in 1920, we're going to take this offline. So we're going to zero out that 600 for both the current, for both the set and design capacity. You'll notice here in this one, the top row is the set capacity and the bottom row is the design capacity, just so you can continue doing that. But obviously, if it's offline, then both of them are going offline. Then, so that's been demolished. So now we're going to come down to the very bottom left and hit Add New Building. We're just gonna call this new apartment community to be named later. And then in 2021 and 2022, we're gonna add a apartment community that has 1,200 beds. And then all you're gonna do is hit update capacity. Now our graph looks really different. So you're gonna immediately be able to see as you can hide the original or the updated at the top, but you can immediately see that you have a tremendous shortage in beds beginning in 1920 and 2021. You can see that you have 700 bed shortage and almost 800 bed, and then when we bring our apartment community online, you have a surplus of over 300 beds, and it continues to go down based on that growth rate. So we really feel like this is where the calculator is dynamic. We're looking at a scenario that has two criteria in it, or two things that we've changed. We changed the growth rates and we changed the capacities, the bed capacities. But you could keep stacking these things. You could keep adding beds. You could do major things. You could change the growth rates, change the yield, and this will keep up with it. And the really neat part about all this, we haven't really talked about this, but the reason you have a login is that you can save it. You can save all this stuff and come back to it. You can also print out a report. Scroll up to the top for me. And then if you click generate your report, it's going to spin for a minute. It's going to look at all this data, and then it's going to create a report. And just note that you're going to have to you click it once, and then it changes from generate your report to download a report. So once it's generated, you can download it. And then you can click in that bottom left-hand corner. You can open up a PDF that is going to display all of the data that you've input, your original and your updated, and for all the years in the projection period too. So you can, it's lengthy, but that's because we have a lot of data in here, and you can see all the things we've changed in all the scenarios, and it's just a handy way for you to carry that to somebody else who just want to take a quick look at it. But you can also log in from another computer using the credentials that you've created.
All right, thank you, Brian. So now that we have walked through how to use the calculator, and as Brian mentioned, the different variables that you can change are almost unlimited. We did a few of those in the exercise, and we hope that helped you understand the dynamic nature of it. But because you can save the data and come back, really it is a powerful tool for looking at almost unlimited what-if type analyses, changing the growth rate, changing the capture of first-time, full-time students, taking beds offline, online. So we hope that this gave you a flavor of the dynamic nature of it, and also helped you to see just how simple it is really to use this tool. So now that we walked through how to use it, we want to introduce Doug Brown, who is the creator of the tool and the president of COCM, to address your questions. And I'm going to ask Brian to go to the dialogue section to see if we have any questions for this. Doug, I tell you what, while we're waiting for the questions, I want to start off with one of my own. This is more of a philosophical question. Is the calculator intended only for those who are in the Department of Housing, or is it intended for other stakeholders at a university campus?
I think it's really a part of a whole planning tool that an enrollment management, business affairs, financial services, all get together and take a look at the tools they really have in their toolbox for enrollment management and maximizing the potential of how housing can contribute to that enrollment management tool. So this is not something you do in isolation. I think it's something you do with the enrollment management folks at the table, because you want to begin to plan how the future looks relative to how housing is going to contribute with either the growth, the stabilization, or perhaps the decline of an institution from an enrollment perspective.
How can the student housing calculator help with capital planning going forward?
Well, this is part of the dynamic nature. I know it went through it quickly, but once you begin to play with the tool, you begin to see that, you know, if you think that an institutional's enrollment is reasonably stable over time, but they're setting some goals for improving either yield of the freshman class to live on campus perhaps, or maybe they're wanting to keep people on campus longer, then the tool becomes one that you can use to begin to predict how those goals would play out in building new facilities, renovating existing facilities. It may point out your inventory control strategies relative to are you using all your beds? Are you tripling up, and to what extent are you overbooking? So you can begin to predict pretty clearly what you need in any given year. It also says if I want to do a renovation program, but I have to do it while I'm still fully enrolled or while I'm still using most of the facilities, then what will I have to adjust to be sure that we can meet our enrollment goals and our housing goals while we have a project under development or under construction? And clearly the bringing down of a building, what kind of problem do I have relative to housing, alternate housing, during the year when I have to replace either all or part of that housing on that particular site. So it really just takes a lot of guesswork by putting together the only stable data you really have at an institution, and that is a lot about looking at your past and then projecting what the future might look like from a capital perspective.
We have one question here. It relates to the 75% number. So can you please remind me where the 75% number came from?
Yeah, so some of this was mentioned in the videos, which some people may have had trouble seeing, but basically we're gonna give you a list of information that we need. A lot of it is going to come from the common data set, most of it in fact, and that's a report that your school, that your institution may or may not put out, but that is an excellent place to do it. But 75% came from, it's a fictitious number for ABC University, but in theory that would have come from the common data set or from an institutional research department at the university, at ABC University.
And actually, we did not have that on the first page of this, so that's a great question, but it is what was assumed for this case study. So great question. Another question that we have is, let's talk a little bit about the common data set. We have obviously teed this up and made it really easy with a fictitious case study. But if a user is going to go out and get the information, I know we talked a little bit about the resources you will need, but let's talk a little bit about where to find that, how long it takes to pull that together, just maybe a little more detail about that.
Well, the common data set, as you know, is a mechanism by which schools can put data in a format who choose to participate in the common data set. They can put their iPad's data in a format that can be easily translated and used year after year after year. So it's, for us, being on the outside of an institution looking in, the common data set is the way for us to make these decisions and populate the calculator. If you're on a campus and you're doing it for yourself, you have the common data set, but you probably also have some good institutional research behind you if you don't participate in the common data set, that you can populate your calculator with your own data. We use the common data set because it is, by and large, the easiest tool and the most common, and puts out the most common results. So my recommendation is start there, and then if you want to refine it in some way, or if you don't participate in the common data set analysis program, then get your data from within your institution.
And Doug, I think this really goes back to the breaking down the silos aspect of the student housing calculator, because if you're going through this, you're going to have to, if you're not in the housing department, you're going to have to pull information from your housing department. You may have to get information from enrollment management. But in the process of that, it sounds like there's a lot of bringing together of various people that really can impact housing in the process.
Yeah, when we do consulting work through Fresh Eyes, which is our consulting program, one of the things we're doing there is to really help to educate the institution how to connect the dots, because of the nature of sometimes those dots aren't ever connected on campus otherwise. And so that's why we really encourage, A, consider housing as an enrollment tool and a retention tool, and B, sit down with the enrollment management folks and begin to plug your program into their plan, because that's critical, so that you don't have huge swings. In 1 year you don't have enough freshman housing, the next year you have too much, or that 1 year there's been a spike in enrollment and you're not ready for it. Or you might want to develop an extended housing program or hotel program because you've suddenly realized the yield is going up of students to enroll or to signal that they're enrolling, and you then have to react to that from a housing perspective. You cannot fix all of the spikes, but you can begin to predict how it's going to affect you as you stay in touch on a daily basis with the enrollment management people as they move through their recruiting process.
One final question, Doug. You, as we talked about earlier, you spent over 20 years working in higher education. If you had the student housing calculator 20 years ago, how would that have changed your career in higher education?
Well, I think the thing that was helpful in stepping back, as you saw in the video to some degree, is you have to almost step out to see how all these dots connect. If I had it back then, I probably would have gone through these exercises before I hired a consultant, so that I knew as much about myself and my institution, and so that I could provide a consultant if you went that far and decided to get that kind of advice, that you would begin to do it in a really informed way, in a real standardized way. I think if I had that information and I was putting out an RFP, I would put out an RFP based on my enrollment goals and who I wanted to house and how I wanted to see my students matriculate through our inventory. And I probably would do that more from an enrollment management perspective and less from a finance or capital perspective. That should come later, in my view. So it really helps to inform, what you might want to do going forward, and you're also using it to inform everyone on campus as to how these connect and why you're making the requests you're making over time.
All right, we have another question. The calculator assumes total housing needs versus needs by class. Assume the program can look at from a class perspective as well. Just change the inputs based on the class data. Is that correct?
Well, there's a real problem in looking at it by class, and we've had that issue over time, and that is that some students are first time to college. We can identify them. There's a definition for who that is in the common data set. Very often you have freshmen, we call them, when they're on campus, but they haven't got enough hours to become sophomores. And we have that same thing from sophomore to junior. So it's really hard to use it by class. It's more of a 30,000 foot level that says this is really the heads and beds, and the two components that are most critical are, I want to help as many first time to college students as I can. I want to pick up that yield as far as I can, because housing has the greatest impact in the first year. And I also want to know how many beds to set aside for returning students, no matter what class they're in, so that I can help as many of those as well, but not at the expense of my first time to college student. So it could be brought down in a second system that you develop on your campus by class,
or by credit hour. But for the purposes of master planning, which is really the tool this is really designed to do, it's just looking at all students.
Well, I want to thank all of you for these great questions and for participating in this webinar today. We hope you've enjoyed learning how to use this innovative campus housing planning tool. And most of all, we hope you use the calculator for planning for the future of your own campus. If you have any other questions about this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@studenthousingcalculator.com. That's info@studenthousingcalculator.com. On behalf of all the student housing professionals here at COCM, thank you again and have a good day.